ये आज का जो इंटरएक्टिव सेशन जो है वो इसी मौजू पर है और आपको जो है ब्रिगेडियर साहब आपको इनलाइटन करेंगे कायदे आज़म की बारे में, उनकी पर्सनैलिटी, उनका कैरेक्टर और उनको जो था वो किस किस्म के असूलों के जो है वो हमेशा वो पाबंद रहे हैं और किस तरह उन्होंने पाकिस्तान को जो है वो हासिल किया। और उसके बाद आप ये देखेंगे कि सारे लीडरशिप जो है हम वो क्या करते रहे, ब्यूरोक्रेट्स ने टेक ओवर कर लिया, फिर उसके बाद मतलब वो जाफर अली खान की असैसिनेशन के बाद और उसके बाद फिर ये 40 हुकूमतें आई, उनको भी हम सपोर्ट करते रहे और फिर जो हमारी सियासी हुकूमतें हैं। अब मसला ये है कि जो आपकी सियासी गवर्नमेंट्स भी जो आती हैं पाकिस्तान में, तो वो आपकी इस्टेब्लिशमेंट जो है उसकी मर्जी के बगैर नहीं आती। लेकिन ये जो चीज़ मैं देखता हूँ कि हम लोग ये क्या है जिसको देखते हैं कि इस्टेब्लिशमेंट अब इस बंदे के साथ है तो हम जो है वो भाग के उसके पीछे लग जाते हैं। और लेकिन इस तरीके से ये हमारा एक वो आइडियलिज्म जो है वो एज लेड डाउन बाय अल्लामा इकबाल एंड कायदे आज़म जो है वो नहीं है। और आप जब तक एक सही लीडर को नहीं चूज करेंगे तो मेरे भी ख्याल में कि आप जो है ये पूरी डायरेक्शन कभी भी सही होगी। सो आई वुड नाउ लाइक टू पास ऑन दिस माइक टू अपना ब्रिगेडियर तैमूर साहब, जो कि आपको कायदे आज़म के पहलुओं से शनाख्त कराएंगे। उसके बाद आपकी जो है वो डिबेट खुल जाएगी, फिर आप जो भी क्वेश्चन आपके जहन में आएंगे तो वो आप उसमें से।
अभी परसों एक बात मुझे पता चली कि जी मियाँ साहब ने कहा कि आपको भी मैंने पैनल में डाला। तो एज ए लीडर जना एज ए लीडर हम चाहते हैं कि पता हो लोगों को पैरामीटर्स का या कुछ कैरेक्टरिस्टिक्स का कि क्या होने चाहिए किसी लीडर में। तो जना के हवाले से 25 के हवाले से एक बात होनी चाहिए, उनकी सालगिरह के हवाले से। तो फिर मैंने सोचा कि 25 को मैंने काफ़ी अखबारें पढ़ी और अलामा को स्कैन किया, बिकॉज लॉट ऑफ आर्टिकल्स अपीयर्ड ऑन द 25th। सो आई थॉट के बजाय इसके कि मैं अपनी किताबों का प्लेथोरा जो है उसको दोबारा से खोलूँ। सो सम फेमस कॉलमिस्ट दे हैव रिटन सो मच अबाउट कायद ऑन द 25th, so why can't I make use of that? So therefore I conceived this presentation in a very hurry कि जी कायदे आज़म जिन्ना as a leader, snippets from the media. So these are snippets, little small pieces that I put together to highlight some of his characteristics. ठीक है जी? जिन्ना the altruistic leader। अभी कहेंगे why altruistic? Altruistic दरअसल एक टर्मिनोलॉजी है जिसमें मुराद होती है कि ऐसे शख्स है जो कि अब खुद से ज़्यादा उसको लार्जर इंटरेस्ट इन लाइफ जो है ना, लार्जर सर्कल के इंटरेस्ट या एक बड़े कॉज के लिए जो शख्स काम करता है, अपने लिए नहीं बल्कि फॉर द लार्जर इंटरेस्ट ऑफ अ लार्जर कॉज। हमारे यहाँ पे मिसाल के तौर पे ईदी साहब हैं, उन्होंने अपने लिए तो कुछ नहीं बनाया, 2 कमरे में ही रहते रहे, लेकिन कितना बड़ा काम कर गए। इसी तरह वो डॉक्टर रूथ थी जो कि डिजीज लोगों के साथ काम करती थी, उन्होंने अपने लिए तो कुछ नहीं किया, बट शी लेफ्ट अ नेम, अ लेगेसी, एंड शी एक्चुअली लेफ्ट एन एग्जाम्पल एज टू हाउ यू कैन सर्व ह्यूमैनिटी। मदर टेरेसा होगी और इस किस्म के बहुत से ऑल्ट्रुइस्टिक लीडर्स। कम्युनिज्म में आपको ची गवारा को आप देख लें, उसने तो कोई प्रॉपर्टी नहीं छोड़ के गया, बट ही लेफ्ट अ लेगेसी, ही लेफ्ट सच पीपल आर नोन एज ऑल्ट्रुइस्टिक। तो मैं चंद एक एग्जांपल्स मुझे मेरी उन्हीं राइटिंग्स में से कि एज ए मेंबर ऑफ द इंपीरियल लेजिस्लेटिव काउंसिल उन्होंने क्या क्या काम किए, विच शोड दैट ही थॉट bigger than the smaller issues which would, let's say, perhaps only deal with the Muslims of India. So he was dealing with issues which were beyond the Muslims of India. He was talking of India itself. He was talking of the entire population of India. So here it says Muhammad Ali Jinnah was the first political leader to protest against the salt tax, जो कि अंग्रेजों ने salt tax लगा दिया था आम लोगों पर, which was basically very gruesome and was typically monopolistic and colonialistic, calling it iniquitous. उन्होंने उसे कहा कि ये बहुत बड़ी ज्यादती है, unheard of in any other country. ये उनके अल्फाज हैं, iniquitous, unheard of in any other country. तो ये this has been, and he actually then campaigned against it, or a campaign spread and later on produced results. Tender in rupees, he thought of India. Although he had studied in England, he had connections in England, he had maybe at that time his practice had reached a level that he was traveling between India and England quite frequently. But his concern was about India at large and not any particular section of society. He said Muhammad Ali Jinnah was the legislator who tabled the resolution calling upon tenders for the government of India to be opened in India in rupees rather than in England in pounds as had been the practice. And who has written this is a very famous author who is highly reliable, authentic, that is Stanley Wolpert in Jinnah of Pakistan. And Wolpert, by the way, said about Jinnah that Jinnah was the greatest statesman of the 20th century. This is exactly the statement I'm quoting, that Jinnah was the greatest statesman of the 20th century. Steadfast in conviction. Around 1906, when Muslim League was formed in Dhaka, and at that time there was the All India Muslim Anglo-Mohammedan Education Conference, which was held there, and they decided that they needed certain political orientation also, and they formed themselves into a political party. But that political party was not representing properly the Muslims of India, because there were only Nawabs in it, and Sir Aga Khan Sohim, Nawab Waqarul Mulk, Nawab Muhsinul Mulk, and Nawab Salimullah of Dhaka, etc., etc. So once they gained access as the representatives of Muslims, the conviction that Jinnah had at that time was that we must talk of the larger interests of the mass of people, that Muslims have been ruling for over 1,000 years in India, rather than now at this stage when we have been, let's say, colonized, that we start thinking of segments. That was what he thought at that time. He was, people call him secular, he was not secular, he was, I call him altruistic. He thought of a larger cause, always the larger cause. And here, steadfast in conviction, Muhammad Ali Jinnah was a Muslim who questioned the representative status of the Simla deputation in 1906, which was actually led by Sir Aga Khan III. This is the reference is there. Yet it was the same Muhammad Ali Jinnah who later, once he had been convinced after about 3 decades that we could not coexist with Hindus, and that's a long story how that conversion towards that belief took place, but it was steady and it was well thought out, and it actually proved the dictum of the Qaid when he always said that once you take a decision, think 100 times before you take that decision, but once you have taken that decision, then stand behind it like one man. So it took him that much time to kind of come to the conclusion that it is impossible for Muslims of India to coexist with the Hindus. And we are now seeing as to what they had actually ultimately they reached the conclusion Muhammad Ali Jinnah was the Muslim who questioned the representative status of the similar deputation. The next sentence says, yet it was the same Muhammad Ali Jinnah who brought about the partition of India. So he always thought of the larger cause. And we go to the next slide and see something. If you read on the role of Muhammad Ali Jinnah, Qaid-e-Azam, in the Imperial Legislative Council in Bombay, and he represented mostly a certain segment of the society, he brought about something which had been a crying demand of the Muslims for a very long time, and that was Waqf al-Awlad law. That was that certain charities could be created out of the inherited property of the Muslims. Something which a lot of the mullahs, a lot of the traditional ulama were opposed to. And he had this particular law enacted. And it became a milestone in the enactment of laws which were more or less the reinterpretation of the Islamic system which was prevalent at that time, or in Islamic thought, and that's true even now. There are many laws which need to be enacted in Pakistan, but the Council of Islamic Ideology and the man from the pulpit or the ulama, so-called ulama, they come in the way, and those laws cannot be enacted. For example, young girls who are under 16 or 18 getting married, and the wani and things like that, all these practices that are taking place in Pakistan, they are against the spirit of Islam. They are denying equal rights to the female population of this country. But yet we cannot move ahead. That leader, with his resolution and his kind of determination, had this law passed as early as that, during the time of the British. His political gurus, sometimes we feel that, oh my God, I only can go to a certain man who is from my faith, or he has to be someone who only agrees with me on matters of religion, on matters of culture. Knowledge is universal, and you can find a good guide anywhere. He need not necessarily be from my sect, he need not necessarily be from my district or my homeland or my village. He could be any wise man whom I consider to have a treasure trove of wisdom from where I can benefit. So his political gurus, who actually honed and refined Jinnah in his outlook on politics and the art of politics, were these three gentlemen. Sir Surinder Nath Banerjee. He was one of the earliest great political leaders of India in the struggle against British colonialism. Then Gopal Krishna Gokhale, with whom Jinnah Sahib once travelled together on the ship from Bombay to England, and they cultivated a lifelong, lasting relationship as friends, and he learned a great deal from him. They were all lawyers. And the third was a Parsi gentleman who was in England by the name of Dadabhai Nauroji. And Nauroji was a parliamentarian, and he was contesting an election once Jinnah Sahib landed in England at the age of about 18, I think. Once he landed there as a student, he then actually went around campaigning for Dadabhai Nauroji in his election campaign for the British Parliament. So he had these gurus, but he did not leave his faith. So you can pick and you can get wisdom from wherever it comes. It need not be the Imam Masjid of my own mosque or some alim of my own sect that I need to look up. I have to be rational, we have to be impartial, we have to be selective according to the merit of what is being said and what is being taught by that person. Still altruism, the subject of altruism is going on. Mr. Jinnah was doing very well as a barrister. He was earning loads of money. He had succeeded as a barrister. He had married the love of his life. They were having a great social life. At the same time, they were famous. They were known in the government circles of Bombay. But still, on principle, he took out a protest against Lord Wellington, who was a very, I would say, a jingoistic British ruler, a gentleman who was a racist, who despised the Indians. He was cruel in his decision making, and he was very unliked, but he had the traditional hangers-on like the local people who still supported him because he happened to be the governor. But once he was leaving back for England, a farewell was organized in his honor by the Sheriff of Bombay, the head of police, and the mayor combined of Bombay. He hosted a certain send-off for him in a public gathering. And Jinnah and Mrs. Jinnah decided to disrupt that particular assembly. And they lodged a protest, and they disturbed that assembly to the point that the farewell could not be properly given to Lord Wellington. And people thought that Jinnah had ruined his career because he had annoyed the British. But since his conscience demanded that this had to be done, and that is why in Bombay even now there is a certain hall that goes by the name of Jinnah. In fact, after this incident, a lot of money was collected. People gave donations to construct a monument in the memory of this incident, and that was named as Jinnah Hall. And that Jinnah Hall still exists in Bombay, which stands as a memory to the bravado or the brave action that Mr. and Mrs. Jinnah led the protest against the British governor. He thought it over. And initially Mr. Jinnah never had any ambition of taking up this assignment as Governor General of Pakistan. He had thought of the Nawab of Bhopal, Abdul Hamid Khan, to be the Governor General because Abdul Hamid Khan, Nawab of Bhopal, had been a great friend of the Pakistan movement, and he had actually contributed greatly even to Allama Iqbal. He had also patronized Allama Iqbal. So he deserved that honor, and Quaid-e-Azam had thought about it. But what happened was, you read the statement. India's cabinet, Sir Field Marshal Sir Claude Auchinleck, had testified. Testified means that he had given a statement that India's cabinet was doing everything in its power to prevent the establishment of Pakistan on a firm basis. So this thing had been sensed by Quaid-e-Azam. You can well imagine his intelligence. Although he was not a great favorite of the British government, so he had no people planted in their offices to know as to what was going on. But he sensed, because his sagacity and his wisdom and the fact that he could analyze things so beautifully, that he sensed that the British would not let Pakistan survive. So, and why he did not at that stage change his decision of putting the governor of the Nawab of Bhopal was that he thought that he would be too naive. Obviously, he was not a politician. He could not have combated the machinations and the conspiracies of the British. Therefore, he thought that he had to fight this battle also. Although he was dying at that time, he knew that he would not live long. He had known that for a couple of years, that he would not be living any longer, because his doctor in Bombay, Patel, hid this secret, and Nehru later on said that if he had known that Jinnah was in the last stage of TB and he would not live long, we would have delayed the partition of India for another year or 2 years. So, Jinnah Sahib at that time, he then thought that this last battle also, he must fight himself to save the newly created state of Pakistan. When we the comment that I picked up from this whatever article that I am quoting here, when we understand that Quaid-e-Azam had not meant to nominate himself, then other pieces fall in place. Yani other facts they line up to tell you as to why he did not opt to appoint Mr. Lord Mountbatten as the Governor General. He actually had the Nawab of Bhopal in mind. It says, thus his pride, which we discussed at the beginning of this paper, did not translate into accepting the office himself. So the author of this article says that it is not the pride that we all associate with him. Those who indulge in slander against the Quaid, they tend to say that, oh my God, he was too proud, so he wanted to be the Governor General himself, it was his ego, etc., etc. So the author says it was not his pride. There were other reasons, and we have discussed those other reasons, right? We must not forget that in order to safeguard the unity of India, Gandhi, and at the behest of Lord Mountbatten, Gandhi ji had offered the Prime Ministership of India to Mr. Jinnah. And why did he refuse it? Because, again, the altruistic leader, he was thinking of the larger purpose. And the larger purpose was to safeguard the interests of the Muslims of the subcontinent. And once we go to some other slide, you would see that he had a much broader vision for the Muslims of the subcontinent, and not only the narrow vision of having only a small state in the Indian subcontinent. Quaid-e-Azam's vision for Pakistan. Now let's see some elements in that. Quaid-e-Azam's vision for Pakistan in 1944, in an interview to the APA representative, Jinnah defined Pakistan geographically. कि geographically हमारे northwest में होगा, ये होगा, वो होगा, and east में होगा. Politically, Pakistan would be a democracy, which we perhaps are still struggling to become one after 72 to 73 years. Economically, Jinnah hoped that major industries and services would be socialized. Now, the word socialized carries a certain connotation. That means it leads us towards socialism. More equitable distribution of resources between the haves and the have-nots. It is pointing in the direction of socialism. But there is an answer to that as well. So therefore, a lot of people sometimes deride Mr. Jinnah, and they say that, oh my God, he talked of Islamic socialism, that means he was against, he was a socialist by belief, and therefore he went against the concept of Islam. But here it has been defined. Islamic socialism had been used by Muhammad Ali Jinnah in 1948 on one side, and Sayyid Qutb Shaheed and Mustafa al-Sibayun on the other in the same year. It was them who explained the term. They said, in Islamic socialism, there would be no atheism of communism, that it would not be the socialism, the kind that Russia has. I delivered a talk in Tulu Islam convention, annual convention, which was Ishtarakiyat or Allama Iqbal. So if you can access Tulu Islam's website and you can find that talk, that's about nearly 2 hours talk. So their website, or you can find this on the YouTube, and there you would see that Allama Iqbal had seen a lot of good in the communist revolution. But he at the same time warned the communists of certain pitfalls and certain areas where he differed with them. So the same is true here, that he had mentioned Islamic socialism there, but at the same time it was qualified there would be no atheism of communism. It would not be without the concept of unity of existence of Almighty Allah. That is Tawheed, which is our faith as Muslims. And there would be no exploitation of capitalism. So these two elements were made clear. So again, this vision was much larger than what it appears on the surface. And where did it come from? In 43, he had said something in Calcutta. He said there are millions of people who hardly get one meal a day. It pinched him. Is this civilization? He says. Is this the aim of Pakistan? If that is Pakistan, I would not have it.
Great.
Jinnah's belief in equality, another of the traits that he demonstrated very, very visibly. Remember, we are building up a state which is going to play its full part in the destinies of the whole Islamic world. I said, his vision was not narrow. He never had a narrow vision that he just wants a state within the subcontinent of India, which is populated by the Muslims, but he sees a larger role for the state in the Islamic world. So he says we are building the destinies of the whole of Islamic world. We therefore need a wider outlook, an outlook which transcends the boundaries of provinces, limited nationalism and racialism. Not that we just want to think that we are Punjabis, Pakhtuns and Sindhis put together somehow by quirk of nature, history, together to live in this region, and we happen to all be saying that we are Muslims, so we must live together and form a state. No, it had a much larger purpose, and he says it transcends the boundaries of provinces, limited nationalism and racialism. So we don't have to believe in racialism and limited nationalism, but we are the Islamic Muslim millat, which Allama Iqbal had defined in his Khutbah al-Abad in 1930. We must develop a sense of patriotism which should galvanize and weld us into one united and strong nation. That is the only way in which we can achieve our goal, the goal of our struggle, the goal for which millions of Muslims have lost their all and laid down their lives. This Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah said in his speech before the students of Islamia College, Peshawar. Government officers, conduct and rights. It is a fact that the country was not being run according to Quaid's liking in whatever little period that he saw it being run. It is addressed to the government officers at Peshawar on April 15, 1948. He had said, you should have no hand in supporting this political party or that political party. Now you have all the bureaucracies and bureaucrats and officials of all departments, they belong to one party or the other. The NAB is leaning towards this side, the judiciary is leaning towards that side, etc., etc. This mumbo jumbo that we see around us at all times, creating confusion in this country, should support this statement that there was chaos, and the Quaid-e-Azam noticed it very early and he cautioned us against it. You should have no hand in supporting the political party or that political party, this political leader or that political leader. This is not your business. Your duty is not only to serve the government loyally and faithfully, but at the same time fearlessly, maintaining your high reputation, your prestige, your honor and integrity of your service. This was the statement or the advice or the warning, I would say, given to the government officials. Quaid-e-Azam, being a constitutionalist, was a firm believer and a staunch supporter of rule of law. According to ADC of Quaid-e-Azam, Major Gul Hasan, around 400 government servants assembled before the gates of Governor General House for a protest. The staff asked for permission to scatter the protesters through lathi charge. But Quaid-e-Azam told the staff that peaceful protest is their constitutional right. So you have your rights, but it is when we cross that limit, like the lawyers crossed their limit right in front of us very recently. And what resulted was chaos, and there is now, I would say, it's a perpetual state of animosity between the lawyers and the doctors. And anything can happen later on, which is bound to happen. Government and the people. And he felt that the people also had certain responsibilities towards their government. And what was that? Good government does not mean autocratic government. Good government does not mean despotic government. Good government means a government that is responsible to the representatives of people. He linked it with democracy because earlier I said that he said that democracy is the kind of government that he wants. Speaking at a public meeting in 1948, he said, remember, it is in your hand to put the government in power and remove the government from power. But you must not do it by mob methods. We have to do it through the ballot, through peaceful politicking, through peaceful political assemblies, through peaceful political dialogue and the ballot. You have the power, you must learn the art to use it. You must learn the art to use it. We have yet not learned the art. We feel that unless we carry the lathis and we say all kinds of nasty things about our enemies, we are not proving our loyalty to our party. You must learn the art to use it. You must try and understand the machinery. Constitutionally, it is in your hands to upset one government and put another government in power. If you are dissatisfied to such an extent, therefore the whole thing is in your hands. So people's power, he believed in people's power, but restrained people's power which works within certain constraints, rules, laws, certain kind of decent behavior. Jinnah's forgotten precept. Being a scrupulous leader, Jinnah cautioned the nation to stay clear of all forms of corruption. One wants to almost cry with tears rolling down one's cheeks, or maybe give a big laughter on this corruption. He warned us against corruption, and we see it all around us. All around us. there is no segment of society which is not involved in corruption. Anyone who can exploit you, or anywhere you can exploit another person and kind of wrench something out of him, get some kind of unfair advantage out of that person, each one of us is equally guilty. Regrettably, this most vital precept emphasized by the father of the nation has long been forgotten. He was an extremely thrifty administrator during his short stint as a Governor General. The word thrifty, that means he valued money, he valued finances. Besides, he left a sizable portion. अभी देखें उन्होंने अपनी wealth को किस खूबसूरती से इस्तेमाल किया. Besides, he left a sizable portion of his personal wealth in the service of several educational institutions as part of his will. I remember two names. One was Islamia College, Peshawar, and second was Sindh Madrasatul Islam. But there were so many others. Also, educational institutions, part of his will, he proposed the same path for the nation in his maiden speech to the Constituent Assembly in August 1947. Jinnah stated, one of the biggest curses from which India is suffering. I do not say that other countries are free from it, but I think our condition is much worse. It's bribery and corruption. That really is a poison. We must put that down with an iron hand, and I hope that you will take adequate measures as soon as it is possible for this assembly to do so. So giving his own example, definitely do. And you know how much he had only one daughter, and compare it with the parents of today who want to give the maximum to their own children. To them, educational institutions and charitable institutions and other such public agencies which are doing welfare work are not important to them. But he gave 99.9999% to all these institutions, welfare institutions, educational institutions. And to his own sister, he left a certain stipend because she had no means of living. Left a little stipend. And to his own daughter, the only child that he had, he left a scholarship or a monthly stipend or whatever you might call it of rupees 100 only. So you can well imagine the kind of justice that he would do with money. He said, I earned it in this land, this money belongs to the people of this country. Jinnah and violence. Jinnah's stance on revenge and violence post anti-Muslim carnage in Calcutta and Bihar. In 1946, once Muslims had won the election and there was some dilly-dallying on formation of government, and at that stage Jinnah ordered a direct action. And as a result of the direct action, the Muslims gathered and they staged some protests and certain kind of demonstrated their strength without indulging in any kind of violence. But the Hindus, in return, they launched massive attacks, arson, loot, and they ravaged Muslim colonies, Muslim areas, residential areas, killed a lot of people in Calcutta and in Bihar. At that stage, I can't read that properly, it's too small, probably it should have been much bigger than this. I can't read it, but what it actually, if you can read it yourself, it is giving a message of peace. That if we return the violence with the same kind of violence, so what would be lost? The larger cause. We therefore have to show restraint and resolve the matter through peaceful means and show that Muslims are people who were peaceful and who sacrifice some impulsive behavior that comes to one's mind in such situations for the sake of a better atmosphere whereby larger issues can be tackled rather than getting embroiled in chaos and violence and arson and loot and whatnot. Jinnah's statement, he was attacked by a Khaksar by the name of Sabir. I forget his complete name. It was something Sabir. Sabir was, I remember one part of the name, Sabir tha. तो उसने आगे ही attacked the कायद in his office और छुरी के साथ, लेकिन कायद इतना वो sharpness of mind थी ना, he was an old man at that time. He got hold of his hand and he was able to get the knife out of his hand. और उसमें कायद को इधर थोड़ा scratch आया on his hand, but he was saved. अच्छा, उसमें जो उन्होंने जो statement दी थी to Memon Chamber of Commerce in Bombay, he stated, grave political issues cannot be settled by the cult of the knife, nor by gangsterism. आज हम हर जगह में gangsterism कर रहे होते हैं. There are parties and parties, but differences between them could not be dissolved by attacks on party leaders. Nor could political views be altered by threats of violence. The issues involved were too grave to warrant change from the course chalked out on which we mean to pursue. The League could neither be disrupted nor destroyed. Even if the League leaders be killed, the League itself cannot be killed. So that was the restraint that he showed, even when he had been attacked himself. Otherwise, a normal human being would say that मैं ऐसी की तैसी इस बंदे की करके छोड़ूंगा. I'll have that man hung up on the pole and his corpse should be hanging somewhere in Bombay. So restraint. So this was the attitude towards violence, that it is not a means to achieve any positive result. Passing the torch. March 23, 1940, Jinnah stated in Daily Net, 100 million Muslims are with us. I see the phoenix-like rise and regeneration of Muslim India from the very ashes of ruination. A miracle people who had lost everything and were placed by providence between the two stones of a mill. यानी कि जैसे वो चक्की के दो पार्टों में पिस रहे थे मुसलमान, ठीक है? Not only came into their own in a very short time, बहुत थोड़े अरसे में पाकिस्तान को हासिल किया गया, but became after the British socially the most solid, militarily the most virile. ये fact है कि जो constitute करते हैं areas Pakistan, they are militarily, even during the colonial period, they were militarily the most virile and contributed to the military strength of the colonial government, and politically the most decisive factor in modern India. So this is one of his statements on once he was handing over Pakistan to us. He is motivating us. He is telling us, these are the attributes that you have, but we did not capitalize on many of them. Jinnah carried the title of Best Ambassador of Hindu-Muslim Unity. He was born in British India and started his politics as a member of the Congress Party. He welcomed Gandhi into Congress Party when Gandhi returned from South Africa. But as time went on, Jinnah's efforts to maintain a cordial party between Hindu and Muslim started to fail, not because of any fault on his part, but mainly because Gandhi decided to play the communal card by starting to refer to Jinnah as the leader of the minority Mohammedan community in India. And that was a slur. That was a slur that Quaid-e-Azam could not take. So he proved to Gandhi and to Congress, and he left Congress in 1920 after the Nagpur session of the Congress, where even Maulana Shaukat Ali, the leader of the Khilafat movement, opposed Mr. Jinnah. And that is the time when Jinnah left Congress on principle and charted a course for himself independently. Though Jinnah was a wealthy man himself, his compassion and wisdom made him focus on the needs of Pakistan's poorest, as well as the freedom of its richest, most powerful people. He cautioned that the first duty of government is to maintain law and order so that the life, property, and religious beliefs of its subjects are fully protected by the state. He also warned against bribery and corruption, the evil of nepotism and jobbery, and regarded them as a poison. He emphasized that this evil must be crushed relentlessly. Jinnah's reference to the development of the Muslims was cumulative and included cultural, look at it, reference to the Muslim was cumulative. इज्तमाई तौर पे बहुत सी खुसूसियात के हामिल मुसलमानों को वो देखते थे, ना कि सिर्फ एक ऐसे लोग जो कि 5 वक्त नमाज पढ़ते हैं, कलमा गो हैं, उसके अलावा दूसरी जो उनके बीच में खसूसियात होनी चाहिए, उसका भी उनके यहाँ पर उसका भी एक ख्याल था. Cumulative and included cultural, economic, political, social, and spiritual aspects, which he sought to safeguard and protect for the Muslim minority in a manner that was fair and just to all concerned and was not limited only to religious worship, belief and practice. Instead of religious worship, belief and practice is the basis, all right, but the building has to be constructed on that faith, and that has many aspects like cultural, economic, social, military, educational. As the world progresses, more aspects of civilization and more needs are emerging that we need to diversify in more fields than what we are being able to do right now. We maintain and hold that Muslims and Hindus are two major nations by any definition or test of a nation. ये गांधी को भी जवाब दिया था उन्होंने 1944 में. Once he and Mr. Gandhi were having their talks. At that stage also he had rebuffed Mr. Gandhi when Mr. Gandhi said that you only are the leader of a minority Mohammedan community, and he made it clear to him. And Gandhi had also said that never in history has a body of converts become a separate nation. You were all Hindus and you became Muslims, and now you say that you are a separate nation. So Quaid-e-Azam had given a very comprehensive answer to him, even in those talks. And here is the statement which he used in the 1940 23rd March in the assemblage in Lahore. He said so, we maintain and hold that Muslims and Hindus are two major nations by any definition or test of a nation. We Muslims are a nation of 100 million people, and what is more, we are a nation with our own distinctive culture and civilization, language and literature, art and aesthetic and architecture, names and nomenclature, sense of value and proportion, legal laws and moral codes, customs and calendar, history and traditions, aptitudes and ambitions. In short, we have our own distinctive outlook on life and off life by all canons of international law. We are a nation. Could there be anything more comprehensive than this? I think no one could have written anything more comprehensive than this. And this is the end of the show.